Good evening, viewers, and welcome back to Media Scan, your favorite weekend show on DD India. This was a completely news-packed week with lots of political debate and some interesting developments on the COVID front. As always, we will take a look at some of the top headlines which dominated media space, and then a very special panel of guests to discuss a couple of those headlines. But first, what made news? Preparations for the vaccine rollout for COVID are now in full swing. Prime Minister Modi reviewed the preparations with officials first and then in a marathon meeting with several chief ministers. PM asked the states to be data ready and also gear up their machinery for implementation. On the other hand, the recent surge prompted the Union Home Ministry to issue directions to the states, allowing fresh restrictions wherever necessary. Some states have already gone for night curfew, and gatherings are now strictly being limited. A national outcry from various quarters, including within the left front, prompted the Kerala government to withdraw the ordinance allowing for arrest of anyone whose comments and posts were found to be offensive. The Pinarayi Vijayan government argued that the ordinance had become necessary after scores of people, especially women, complained of harassment, threats and abuse on social media platforms. We will discuss all these aspects with our special guests in just a few moments. Another law which has been in headlines for days now is the one against religious conversions for marriage, popularly known as the Love Jihad law. Uttar Pradesh cabinet cleared it earlier this week, while Madhya Pradesh has also finalized a draft. Haryana and Karnataka have announced that their legislations are also underway. This law is aimed at curbing religious conversion of women after being lured into marriage through fraud, impersonation or blackmail. Much more on this in our next segment. An internal group of the Reserve Bank of India has proposed that corporates can be allowed to promote banks in order to increase the access and penetration of banking facilities. The working group has also suggested an amendment in the Banking Regulation Act to facilitate the move. The corporates have broadly welcomed the proposal, though there are some concerns about the overlapping of interests in lending. New Delhi gave clinching evidence of Pakistan's involvement in the recent infiltration attempts into Jammu Kashmir, particularly at Nagrota near Jammu. Government representatives briefed diplomats from the US, UK and other countries, providing them with evidences such as markings on gadgets, etc. The Ministry of External Affairs has warned Pakistan that these attempts at infiltration and violence are clearly aimed at disturbing the DDC polls in the UT and will not be tolerated. So, those were a few of the top headlines you saw all over the media through this week. To discuss and understand a couple of these issues, I have with me this evening a distinguished panel of senior journalists and political observers. Let me first introduce my guests to you. I have with me here today Mr. R. Jagannathan, Editorial Director of the Swarajya News and Opinion Platform. Mr. Jagannathan is not only a senior journalist, but he is an author and a regular columnist, commentator on political and current affairs. Welcome, Mr. Jagannathan. This is your first appearance on Media Scan, and I'm very happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Smita. Happy to be here.
I also have with me another guest, Mr. Karthikeya Tanna, a well-known face on social media, a sharp and bold commentator, author, columnist. Fortunately for us, Mr. Tanna is in the country these days, and I asked him to join the Media Scan. Welcome both of you gentlemen, because this is your first appearance on Media Scan for both of you.
Thank you.
So, let's get on with our discussion. Earlier this week, the Uttar Pradesh cabinet passed a draft law which envisages 5 years jail term against those found to force women into conversion through marriage. Madhya Pradesh, Haryana and Karnataka have also announced that their laws are underway. The media and some activists have commented that the laws are regressive and anti-women. On the other hand, various social and women organizations have been crying hoarse for last few years demanding such a law. They claim that there is a conspiracy underfoot to lure young women either by fraud or impersonation or coercion and force them into marriage and then make them convert. While too many issues have come into play here in this entire issue, the moot question being raised is the individual right of a woman to choose her partner as against criminal conspiracy to convert. But before we debate that, let's hear what UP Minister and the government spokesman Siddharthnath Singh had to say about the law.
योगी जी की कैबिनेट ने ये अध्यादेश लेकर आए हैं। इस अध्यादेश के अंदर दंड के अनेक प्रावधान हैं और इसमें विशेष रूप से 1 वर्ष से अधिकतम 5 वर्ष तक की, जो कि 15,000 का जुर्माना भी है इसमें, और कहीं अवयस्क महिला, उसके साथ साथ अनुसूचित जाति, अनुसूचित जनजाति की महिला है, उसके अंदर किसी भी, जो अभी दायरा आपको बताया, छल कपट जिसके अंदर परिवर्तन बलपूर्वक करवाया गया है, इसके अंदर कहीं किया जाता है तो इन महिलाओं के साथ किया जाता है तो उसमें दंड जो है वो 3 वर्ष से लेके 10 वर्ष तक की है और जुर्माना 25,000 रुपए है।
So that was Siddharthnath Singh, the spokesman of the UP government. You heard him give out details and particularly the intent of bringing such a law. I want to come to Mr. Kartikeya Tanna first. Mr. Tanna, I was reading your column on the same subject and also your views over the last few months on the issue. The question again is, by constitution and by individual right, a woman is free to choose her partner. On the other hand, there are concerns from the society, from other organizations and also the government that women or their women citizens do not fall prey to any conspiracy or criminal move. How do you see creating a balance between these two situations, particularly as the judiciary as well as media and activists have said this law is not right? Your perspective.
Well, first of all, there is no restriction under this law of any kind on any kind of marriage, interfaith marriage or otherwise. The restriction is only in regards to conversion. So, for example, if an interfaith couple want to get married and the issue is, or the desire rather, on the part of one is that the other convert to a religion, then this law essentially wants to have a vetting process, which is that the person desiring to so convert has to apply to the district magistrate, according to the UP law is 2 months in advance, and specify the reason, the purpose, and the circumstances around the conversion, so that the district magistrate can assure himself or herself, as the case may be, that this
Mr.
conversion
Tanna,
is
allow me to be the devil's advocate here, but very often the concern that is raised is there may be these conditions of applying to the government in advance for conversion, etc. But it becomes, it becomes like splitting hairs. It's very difficult to ascertain whether the woman is converting because of coercion or she is doing it from her free will. How do we ensure what is right or what is correct?
No, but which is why there is a 2-month period before which a person has to apply, a woman or a man who desiring to convert for the purposes of marriage has to apply.
Yes.
And that 2-month period is under law deemed sufficient for the district magistrate in order to at least do an investigation. Because what also happens is that the district magistrate involves the local police in this investigation process, in this due diligence process, in order to make sure that the conversion is not fraudulent or by allurement or by undue influence or even solely for the purposes of marriage. Because what has happened is this law has essentially come into being because of situations and incidents that have happened where couples have fallen in love and they want to get married, but then there's pressure of some or the other kind for one of the persons to get converted, or there's a pressure beforehand to get converted, and then there are social consequences to it. See, the reason why conversion is a state issue, is the concern of the state, is because religious status, so which religion you and I belong to, as well as marital status, affects a lot of rights. It affects a lot of rights in regard to property, in regard to inheritance, in regard to which personal law applies. So because the state is guaranteeing the enjoyment of these rights, the state has the authority to investigate into whether or not the conversion is...
I'll come to that. I'll come to that, Mr. Tanna, the larger question of having standard or common personal laws. But before that, I want to bring Mr. Jagannathan into the debate.
Sure.
Mr. Jagannathan, my question is, first of all, before I come to what you have written on the whole issue, just one interjection which came from Mr. Tanna regarding this converting one's religion or faith solely for the purposes of marriage. We have a Special Marriage Act by which a man or a woman is free to follow his or her faith even if the spouse is professes some other religion. How do you see the exercise of the Special Marriage Act, and why does still not people do not go on that option?
Yeah, this is where I think a law probably is less helpful than educating women about their rights, since it is about the woman ultimately. It is not really about what anybody thinks about whether you should marry A or B or C. It is about the woman's rights. So a lot of our women may not know that when they agree to, let us say, a nikah or a church wedding, that they necessarily have to convert. They may just think it is some ritual so we can do it. But actually their entire right situation changes once they agree to a certain form of marriage, because you can't do that without getting converted. And once you get converted, because we do not have a uniform civil code, you essentially have to follow the personal laws of that particular religion, which if
I'm getting you correct, Jagannathan sir, do you think the activists or even media commentators, they are being selective in this matter, or they are deliberately suppressing this angle of the women's rights, you know, while calling the love jihad laws anti-women?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's not forget one thing. This is not just about, let's say, a Hindu girl whose rights may go. It also affects Muslim women's rights, because under certain laws, somebody can have 2 wives or more. Right? Yes. So if you're marrying one and the other person does not know, and then you marry again, then it affects the other person's rights also. And also your rights under the constitution change even if you are marrying within the same faith. Let's say one Muslim marries another Muslim under a nikah. They have a certain specific thing, but the constitution gives much wider rights to the woman, you know, including the right to follow a family court and other in divorce and all those things. Those are not changed even for them. So there is a question of double failure of gender rights here. One, when there is interfaith and conversion related to marriage, and other, even in the same community where the equal rights are not available. So it's primarily, I mean, I agree that this is about rights, but this is about both sides' rights. And also recent incidents have shown that some of, say there was a case of Ankit Jain, who had a friend from another community, and the girl's own mother actually had this guy murdered or something like that. That's the allegation. More recently, just a month or two back, there was a young boy called Rahul, who had a friend from the other community, and he got killed. There's one more case in UP also which was like that. So my point is here, both communities tend to be patriarchal, but in some situations, especially when your marriage laws are different and they're not common to all, there is a question of gender rights being violated twice over for both communities. You know, it's not right.
I want to bring in Mr. Tanna here before we move on to the next aspect of the whole issue. Mr. Tanna, this clash of women's rights, you know, on the one hand, the woman's right to choose her partner, but as Mr. Jagannathan just said, it is like a double whammy. It's not only, it's gender bias being applied on the woman and patriarchy many times over. How do you look at the point that he has raised?
Well, okay. So women's rights are not affected. First of all, the interfaith marriages continue to exist. Special Marriage Act continues to exist. The question is, if you want to convert, or if one party wants to convert the other for marriage, even then the conversion is not prohibited. The conversion has to pass through a vetting process. The reason for this is, and again, to bring in the constitutional aspects, Article 25 gives the freedom to practice and propagate religion. So many people are quoting that. But if you see Article 25, it begins with the first 4 words, which is subject to public order. Now, what is
On
public
that,
order?
I think Mr. Jagannathan may have a point to add, because he has very categorically raised the issue of proselytizing Abrahamic religions versus a religion like Hinduism or the Sanatan faith, you know. Mr. Jagannathan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, the thing is, there is a fundamental power asymmetry between religions that aggressively convert and that a religion that does not do so, right? So what really happens is, if you combine patriarchy, where even within the same community, when a woman marries somebody, the
Yes.
woman is expected to adjust to the man's family, right? So when there is an interfaith issue, why do you think conversion will not be a pressure, subtle form of pressure brought into that marriage, regardless of whether she married out of love or not? So I
Right.
think the fundamental issue is there, that unless we address the asymmetry brought in by a converting religion and a non-converting religion, both through social education and a minor form of law, which at least tells you about your rights and says you go through a process before you say, yes, I do actually want to convert, then that process is okay. But primarily, this is a job that both government and society need to tell women that these are your rights. If you do this, this is what you lose. If you don't do this, this is what you gain. Then you take your decision. If you still want to convert, nobody is going to stop you.
Point
So
taken.
I think,
So basically, there is an awareness angle involved along with bringing the legislations. Mr. Tanna, coming back to the point that you raised earlier in the debate about the need to have a standard or common personal laws. We are still very far from that goal enshrined in our constitution. But why do you think a common civil code, a uniform civil code is the answer to such situations such as is called love jihad?
Well, because it, when you have a universal, and we don't know if, we don't know what the contents will be, but assuming what has happened in other democracies around the world,
Yes.
there will be one standard, one uniform process, one uniform standard for marriages. So that way, this issue of conversion or otherwise will not arise. See, problem happens in personal laws, because once, let's say, for example, if a Muslim man hypothetically wants to marry a Hindu girl, and the Hindu girl doesn't want to convert, then there are issues in Muslim personal law which consider this marriage as illegitimate or invalid. So
Yes.
then how do you deal with that question? Because then what happens is that these women are then, if let's say if the marriage is invalidated, these women are left to fend on their own. And that creates a
Mr.
public disorder
Jagannathan,
situation.
just to end this segment of our debate, from what Mr. Tanna has just raised, again the question will come back to India is a diverse country. All religions have a right to preserve their rituals, and one size fits all cannot work. So what is your counter argument to that in favor of a uniform civil code?
see, the point is very simple. The law has to be the same for all. Nobody
Right.
is saying you should not have a cultural practice, which is this way I conduct my marriage, but the cultural practice that you have, depending on what your religious or sampradaya is or your other actual Abrahamic religion is, you can follow that as a cultural practice. The minute you say that now becomes the law for me, but not for the others, then you're creating an unequal country with unequal rights. So where is the fundamental thing in the preamble? People are fond of reading the preamble, but they say they want equality, fraternity, liberty, and all,
Right.
all equality and liberty of the women you want to take away.
All right, point taken. So if I understand Mr. Jagannathan correctly, what he's saying is there should be no clash between one's cultural practices, religious belief, faith, and the legal position when it comes to marriage or even other practices. With that, I move on to the other subject for debate on our table this evening. Another law, another controversy. The Kerala government faced all-round outrage from the media, activists and constitutional experts, including their own party leaders, for an ordinance amending their police act. This ordinance was to give sweeping powers to the police to arrest anyone whose posts and comments on media platforms were found to be objectionable, offensive, or demeaning. The argument was that people, especially women, are being regularly harassed, threatened, and abused on social media platforms. The immediate outcry compelled the Pinarayi government to bring a second ordinance nullifying the earlier one. However, FIRs, arrests and jail term etc. are becoming common in various other states as well. Let's discuss. On this, Mr. Kartikeya Tanna, let me come to you first. You being such a popular handle on Twitter, other social media platforms, and you have been voicing your thoughts, your ideas very boldly. My question to you is, we cannot deny the fact that women for the last few years have been targeted on the social media platforms if they try to air their views openly. And we can also feel that the IT laws which govern the issue have not been quite enough on that. But then, if such an ordinance is being brought, we have been watching this in Maharashtra, in Kerala again, in West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, several states. My question to you is, how do we find a common ground where a citizen's rights are not violated, but this kind of intimidation and harassment can be curtailed?
Well, I think, frankly, Smitaji, you and I are sitting here and debating about this freely only because some state government that has jurisdiction over us has decided not to arrest us. Because the way these laws are framed and introduced, they give sweeping powers. What is objectionable, for example? What is demeaning? For example, Kerala, right? I could criticize their COVID response. Would that be demeaning? Would that be me? Possibly. Can they start the criminal process against me? Yes. See, that's the problem. So I don't think, Smitaji, I don't think there is any middle ground here. Freedom of speech is, I think, paramount, because only when there is freedom of speech, freedom to criticize, freedom to point out issues, only then we will actually become a mature democracy. And I think these leaders who have been elected on popular will, popular mandate, they must develop a thicker skin rather than, introduce these laws that give police sweeping powers to start process.
In fact, I was coming to that.
Is the punishment itself.
I was coming to that, and I want to take Mr. Jagannathan on this. Sir, do you think our chief ministers, our administrative officers, even the judiciary are becoming a little too touchy to comments and criticism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all people in public life must develop a thick skin as far as criticism is concerned. We may draw the line somewhere if it's excessive abuse or threat to your life or some such thing. In women in particular get rape threats and those kind of things. Those I think we should clamp down on. And one thing is, of course, the media platform itself should be able to flag certain things internally, technologically, to see that such voices are muted. And of course, if you are a woman, I would say you should block such handles. That can be done. The second thing is the law should be precise in terms of what it wants to block. It can't say if I criticize a chief minister, even harshly, if I say let's say a chief minister A is a fool for having brought such a thing, I should not be hauled up and sent to jail, because occasionally one may use unparliamentary words. But it's only when it crosses a certain line which needs to be defined by the law more clearly.
So you are saying the right to expression can and does include the right to offend, if that's the word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what is really happening is, because of the way our penal code and also the amendments to Article 19 have been changed, where I think there are 8 restrictions on free speech, which includes things like criticizing a friendly country. Also, it can put you in jail. So this is ridiculous. If you want to have some kind, also there is an asymmetry again here. Say there are some religions which have blasphemy laws, other religions that do not have blasphemy laws, which means that you can happily criticize religions that do not have blasphemy laws, call them names, do anything, but the others get protection because that is a threat to public
order. We
saw
saw a lot on that in France very recently. But on another very pertinent point here, I want to come to Mr. Tanna. Sir, we know that in our constitution, freedom of expression is not quite absolute. However, the concern that is being raised is this question of offending or even demeaning, if you say, or criticizing somebody. Is it really right to put it in the hands of a police force? We know that the police in India, in any state for that matter, is not exactly trained for such treatment.
No, Smitaji, you and I know, the incidents that have happened recently, especially, but even since a long time, The police is often used as the henchman of elected governments to essentially punish anyone that they find inconvenient under any kind of a law. And this law only adds to that express power. They have done this indirectly in many ways. This law is very blatant in that regard. But my concern is this, that okay, if let's say if there's a defamatory speech that is given, right, like in exercise of my freedom of speech, there are laws against defamation. You can file a lawsuit,
Correct.
you know,
Yes.
for in under defamation, and you can let the courts play its role in deciding whether it's defamatory or not. But then to increase that standard and make it expansive to you know, just to include anything and everything that's inconvenient, offensive, objectionable, that is just bizarre, because that is a recipe of really an immature democracy. Then we are essentially
Right.
you know,
I
going
think-
towards an immature democracy.
Correct. Point taken. I think on the question of defamation also, there were a lot of issues being raised. Perhaps one of these weekends we'll have the opportunity to discuss defamation laws as well. And as Mr. Tanna was trying to say, like it happened in Kerala just now, we have to be vigilant if we want to preserve our democracy. But the fact remains that there are several people still in custody in various states of the country just because the political dispensation found some of their comments or their views not quite positively inclined. On that note, gentlemen, I'm sorry, I've completely run out of time. And though this was a very enlightening discussion, I must wind up now. Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan, Mr. Karthikeya Tanna,
Thank
for
you.
joining Media Scan show this evening. And I hope I'll catch up with both of you on some other episode very soon. Thank you again, gentlemen. And with that, viewers, it's time for me to wind up from Media Scan. Please continue to watch DD India while we continue to scan the media for you. Good night.